even Saric, 2671, Magnus-Carlsen, 2077. Let's see how you destroy a world champion. Okay, so Ruy Lopez, bishop b5, standard. So now a6 is like the most common move. Knight f6 would signal the Berlin, which is super popular at the top level these days. Magnus has played both sides of this position numerous times, including in the match with Anand as white, and he's played this position recently against Caruana as black. That was actually one of his most recent losses. You can also play d6, which is kind of like an old system, Steinitz. A lot of moves here, but a6 and knight f6 are really the most common at top level. But Magnus makes mistake number 1, which is he plays knight d4. So it's not really a mistake, like, as in he's losing, but it's definitely a bit speculative, this variation. It's called the bird's defense. So you know if it's named after bird, you know it's not good, because his other opening is 1 f4, which is not very good either. I mean, it's fine, but it's not the most challenging. So anyway, Magnus is just trying to get a position. But, you know, I mean, Saric is a fairly strong grandmaster, so Saric plays the most principled variation, which is to take on d4. Notice this knight's attacking this bishop. So he plays knight takes and e takes. So if you actually notice, there's a difference between this and this position, which is after, say, knight c3, knight f6, bishop e5. So here, a very common move is knight d4. This is actually the main move. And the point is, after take, you're actually gaining a tempo with which you can take this pawn. So usually after this, white will either play bishop c4, bishop a4, or castle. But here, the difference being that after take, this pawn isn't actually threatening anything. So right now, white has a piece developed, and black, all he has developed is just this pawn on d4, which isn't really a weakness per se, but you know, he's kind of making his pawn structure a little bit compromised for no real gain. So this was Magnus's first mistake. Okay, but I mean, you know, it's playable. It's just white should come with an edge. So again, white plays the best move here, which is actually, do you guys know what the best move is here? Well, not the best move, but a good move. I guess the most common move is actually the castle right away. But he played bishop c4. So he's kind of anticipating that black's going to play c6 at some point. And so he kind of removes his bishop from that diagonal. Because now there's no knight on c6, so there's really no point for this bishop to be there. But castling is also fine too. It can transpose. Okay, so knight f6. So this is the main move. And here, white decides to just castle. If white plays e5, of course, black would respond with the standard d5, and this should be fine. But yeah, white castles. Okay. And now, what should black play here? What should black play? Well, probably black should try to fight for that d5 square and play c6. So white can still maintain some edge after rook e1, d6 just to stop e5, c3, knight g4 to hop into e5, h3, knight e5, d3, take. So black has two bishops, but white has a huge lead in development. This pawn on d6 is kind of always a target because it's on an open file and it's backwards. You can't really push it because I have full control over d5, so white's just going to kind of make natural moves, bishop f4, queen d2, and then castle. But it is playable. I mean, black's going to go something like bishop e7 and queen c7 and castle, and just try to hold on. At some point, maybe try to get his bishops working. But yeah, this is kind of the most natural response. But Magnus, again, trying to make things a little bit more interesting, plays d5 immediately. So white simply takes. And now black could recapture. Then after rook e1, bishop e7, queen h5, threatening the knight. c6, queen e5, threatening to take on g7. Castle. And now the trick is that after bishop takes d5, threatening to win a piece, because now this is attacked twice. Black doesn't actually recapture, but instead black plays bishop d6 first. Then after queen takes d4, black can actually play c takes d5. And the point is that, of course, queen takes d5 loses to bishop takes h2 check, winning the queen to a tactic. But after d3, I mean, white's up a pawn, 7 on 6, and not to mention black also has an isolated pawn. So it's not great, but okay, I mean, he has two bishops. He has, okay, some minor compensation. But instead Magnus didn't take back and play bishop e7 first, which is okay. But again, he's kind of gambited a pawn. And after queen f3, protecting a pawn, bishop g4, white simply plays queen f4. So now again, this knight is defending this bishop, so no time to take here. So Magnus decides to castle, which makes sense. And now, what should white play here? What should white play here? So white is currently up a pawn. And he could potentially win a second pawn with queen takes d4 at some point. Maybe now even. But his queenside is underdeveloped. So black kind of captured a lead in development for sacrifice of a pawn. So what should he play here? So notice if he captures on d4 immediately, it kind of plays into black's hands a little bit, because black's just going to go c6 followed by even bishop e6. So for example, after c6, knight c3, bishop e6, exploiting the fact that this queen is pinned. And black will capture a pawn back and have a playable position, because again he'll have a slight new development. But he will still be down a pawn, because right now it's 8 on 6, so once he takes it'll be 7 on 6. But he actually found a better move than that, which was to play h3 first. So this move, it seems like, okay, it's just chasing the bishop away, but it turns out this bishop doesn't actually have too many great squares. Because it doesn't really want to go back this way. But if it goes back this way, like, it could interfere with the queen. And if it goes back to c8, then you're kind of underdeveloping it. So he played bishop d6, which was kind of tempo gain, but now he can take on d4. Okay. So now was kind of Magnus's last chance to somewhat salvage this position. So he's played a few speculative moves. He's down 2 pawns with not much compensation. So Magnus has to find the right move here, but it doesn't have much... unfortunately, it doesn't leave him much counterplay. But he'd be fighting for a draw as opposed to fighting for a loss. Okay, so what must black play here? Do you guys know? What must black play here? So if he's going to have any hope of, you know, not just being down 2 pawns for nothing, he needs to play the move bishop to e6. And the idea, of course, is that you can't take this because of bishop h2 check. And again, this queen on queen, the fact that this queen on d4 is undefended leads to some tactics. So after bishop e6, probably what would happen is knight c3, c6, again, trying to win this pawn. Again, this pawn is pinned because if it captures either way, bishop h2 wins the queen. So something like d3, knight d5, knight d5, cd5, bishop e3. And okay, I mean, again, white's up a pawn, black has an isolated pawn, but, you know, I mean, it's possible that black could maybe draw this. But what happened in the game, not so likely. So the queen takes d4, black played c5. So again, he's exploiting the fact that if d takes c6 en passant, bishop h2 wins the queen. But, of course, white will not do that. And white will instead move the queen. So the question is where to move the queen. Do you guys know where he should move the queen? So he only has 3 choices. Queen c3, queen d3, or queen e3. So which of those 3 moves looks the best? They all have their kind of pluses and minuses, but one is better than the other for interesting reasons. So they all look like it kind of awkward, right? They all look kind of awkward. So queen c3, the problem with queen c3 is that you deprive the natural square from your knight. The problem with queen d3 is you deprive your pawn from being able to push forward. You also box in your bishop. And you maybe expose yourself to some bishop retreats at some point. And queen e3, the problem is you run into rook e8, gaining tempo. And then your queen has to eventually go back to some other square anyway. So it's hard to figure out which one's the best, but if you think about it kind of concretely, you come up with the right solution. So it turns out that the right move of the 3 is actually queen d3. At first glance, it seems like it's the worst in a way because you're making this bishop suck. This queen could be potentially, you know, attacked on this diagonal, and also your bishop can't get out. But if you actually think about it, this queen also helps to defend this pawn. So now this pawn is cemented. It actually prevents bishop f5, which is a natural retreat for this bishop. And actually, this bishop is probably going to go this way. Probably going to go this way. So queen d3 was quite correct, actually. And now white just up 2 clear pawns, just 8 pawns to 6. I mean, he has a healthy pawn on d5. It's passed even. He just is up 2 pawns. Black does still have a lead development, but the problem is he can't really use it to his advantage anymore. So bishop h5, trying to get this way. And now knight c3, very strong. Just defending this, again, getting his pieces out. And now, probably, what should black play here? What do you guys think? What should black play here? Well, it's already getting kind of tough, but he has to somehow figure out a way to maybe exploit the fact that these pieces are sort of blocked in. So, a move like a6, threatening simply b5. And so this kind of forces a4. And then maybe bishop g6. This makes sense. So queen f3 probably after that. And now maybe just like knight to d7, knight to e5. You don't necessarily want to take on c2 because d3 and then the bishop is kind of trapped. But maybe just like knight d7, knight e5. But yeah, this would make a lot more sense than what happened in the game. Yeah, if bishop g6 again, yeah, queen f3, sure. But I think throwing in a6 makes sense. Just to kind of force a4. Maybe not even bishop g6 after a6, but maybe so knight c3, so maybe a6, a4, and then maybe like queen a5, still trying to play b5. And then white would have to play rook a2. Or else b5, and then you couldn't take because I could take your rook. But now the rook's defended. And then like queen c7, for example. And okay, at least you have some pressure on this diagonal. And you're trying to stop f4 as much as you can. Because white's real idea in this position, in general, is that he wants to simply play f4, and then this bishop is trapped. So he wants to play like f4, g4, and f5, and trap the bishop. So black kind of has to make moves to stop that threat. Okay, but instead, black played a natural like rook e8, but now all of a sudden he's in real trouble, because after f4, now this bishop is actually stuck. Bishop g6, no more time for it, f5. f5. So f4 was a very strong move. So black tried a6 now, but it's too late. He should have tried a6 before, so he had time to play queen a5 to queen c7. So queen a5, the only point of that is just to kind of force rook a2, which is, you know, not a move that white really wants to make, but yeah, he should have given himself time to play queen c7. But now, after a6, a4, all of a sudden, okay, now he's just, this bishop is stuck. This bishop is stuck. Okay, but white still has to be a little bit careful, of course, because, for example, if he plays f5 and g4 here, he's actually losing, because after knight takes, pawn takes, queen h4, he's getting mated. So, he still has to be a little bit careful. But, that is his idea. So, after a4, black played queen d7. Again, with the idea that if g4, he's going to actually take on g4. Which would be very strong. So, for example, after g4, take,
check,
and you bring your knight into g4, and the rook comes in, and it's actually very dangerous. But of course, white doesn't have to play g4; he can just play another move. So after queen d7, he plays queen to g3. Looks kind of odd at first glance, but he simply wants to play queen h4, and then g4. And then f5, which is reasonable. Okay, so now Black tries to get some activity for his pieces and plays knight e4. Okay, well, take. And now b3, defending the bishop and getting ready to play bishop b2. And all of a sudden there's some very grave threats on Black's king. So probably Black had to play bishop g6 here, just to try to block up this g file. But he plays queen c7, trying to attack this pawn 3 times. So of course we defend it. And now make this bishop into a big pawn, but it's okay because this bishop is really not doing much either. He can never really win this bishop because he can never play b5. And we can always play a5 ourselves if we have to. And so this is fine. Okay, now Carlsen kind of made a rather serious mistake. I mean, he's already in big trouble, but he needs to give this bishop a flight square. So after d3, he has to move the rook to a square where he can give this bishop e2, potentially. So his best move is to play rook e7, probably, with the idea that after queen g5, bishop e2. And it looks awkward, but rook e1, f6, queen h4, and rook e8. And this is actually playable. But Magnus was striving for some activity and instead played rook e2. But the problem is now this bishop no longer has e2. So queen to g5. And now real problems. Because where's this bishop going to go? Where is the bishop going to go? If bishop g6, simply f5. And now if rook e5, just bishop to b2. And now the rook is stuck. If the rook moves, we take on g6. If the rook doesn't move, we win the exchange. So Black is already losing a bunch of material here. So he tries g6 to defend this bishop. Okay, well, g6 is not looking good. So now it seems like we could play g4. And we probably can, but we have to watch out and be a little bit careful because our queen is actually running short of squares. So Black has some sort of idea to play bishop e7, bishop f8, and maybe get some sort of weird draw by perpetual. There's actually a way to avoid it, but I think White just wanted to be super clean in the game and not have any mess. But yeah, the idea is, okay, if you play g4, bishop e7, you can actually play d6 and get your queen out this way. And this is winning. But, okay, it looks a little messy. So, bishop to b2. So now not only is he trying to win the bishop, he's actually just trying to checkmate. So queen f6 is a big threat with mate on this diagonal. That's weakened by g6. So now, I mean, Black is completely busted. But there's still some very nice tactics that happen in the game that we should look at. So, Black played bishop e7, natural move to attack the queen. And now, dear viewers, can you figure out what White should do here? If you can, you're probably a computer, so check yourself for some trace silicon, but do you guys know what White should play here? It's actually very, very beautiful. So our queen's attacked. What to do, what to do, what to do. What to do, what to do. So, I mean, there's not just one solution. What White played in the game was definitely good. There's actually something very clever that he could have played. And what he could have played is d6, right? Okay, but what's the idea though? What's the idea? Say I take it. What's the idea? Okay, well if I take with the bishop, just queen f6 mates, right? Or wins like a bunch of material. I mean, I'm just gonna play queen h8 and take the rook, right? Yeah, so queen, I mean, you're not mated, but you're losing a rook, and then this bishop is still trapped, and it's just really bad. Okay, so that's obvious. Okay, but what happens if queen takes, for example? What happens if queen takes? So yeah, d6 has the idea to, you know, deflect the bishop. And, okay, while you guys are thinking about queen takes, if bishop takes queen, pawn takes queen, and now you actually have a couple of threats. We're threatening this, but we're also threatening g4. So relatively best for black would be to play bishop h6, but then g4 wins a piece, and this pawn is super strong. So this is, you know, very much over. Because now without the queens on the board, you know, just being up a piece is just huge. And not to mention that black has to waste some time to guard against this. So, but the real question is what happens if queen takes pawn? Okay, so since you guys aren't silicon, you wouldn't be able to see it. Queen takes d6, and now, okay, so queen h6, threatening mate, just bishop f8, and you're surviving. You can also actually play bishop f6 too, by the way, because the queen defends. And yeah, if bishop takes f7, it's a little much. f5 doesn't quite work. Oh, whoops. Because the queen's hanging. Don't forget, I'm still attacking the queen. So yeah, after d6, queen takes d6, the right move is queen to e5. So the point is you're actually threatening an unstoppable checkmate. And also a fork. So you're forking this, and you're forking the mate. Which is simple enough. Right? But okay, it looks absurd because the queen can be taken two ways. But okay, f6 is illegal, bishop f6 hangs the queen, etc. So you either have to take the queen basically. So why is this good? Why is this good? Well, okay, if you take with the queen, let's start with that one. Simply bishop takes, and again we're just going to play g4. So after g5, just g4. Bishop g6, and now d4. Double threat. Defending this, and also threatening the rook. So rook takes e5 is relatively best. D takes e5, and you just up the exchange. Not to mention that we have pressure on the f file. So this is just hopeless. Whoops, let me go forward again. Okay. So that's that. Now, the real question is what happens on rook takes e5. And so rook takes e5. Now the cute idea is bishop takes f7 check. So if you take, I take with check, and I win the exchange. Because I have two rooks, you have one. So I'm winning a full queen here. You have to move your king someplace, and I just take your queen. Just up the exchange. So you have to move your king someplace other than taking. And if you play king g7 or king h8, either one, I just play bishop takes e5 check. And again, I am up the exchange. Notice how my rook defends f7 at the end. So that works. So the real question is what happens on king f8. And now after king f8, f takes e5. Now the queen has to move. Queen c7. Bishop takes g6 check. King moves somewhere, say g7. Bishop takes h5. So now I'm threatening rook f7 check, probably, at the very least. So rook f8, trying to trade. E6 check.
Check.
King h6. And bishop f7. And the idea is that I simply want to play rook to f5 and rook to h5 mate. And that's surprisingly hard to stop. If you play like rook g5, I can just play rook e1 to e4 to h4, and again you're going to be mated. Not to mention I have bishop c1 winning material. And this pawn is super strong. And this pawn is super strong. So yeah, this whole variation is nuts, but it turns out that these two bishops are just monsters. And the king is very weak. And the pawn on e5 heading to e6 is very strong. So this just wins. This just wins. Okay, but this is again very messy. Very messy. So instead, white played the more natural bishop f6, which is also very good. He didn't really spoil anything by not seeing d6, it just would have been more spectacular. And now black plays h6, trying to deflect the queen off of f6. Okay, so he could have played queen h4, which is also good, but he played bishop e5 instead. So the point is, if you take, I'm going to take, and then I'm also threatening to promote my pawn, I'm threatening the bishop, and I'm also threatening g4. So you can't really trade queens like that. If you take on e5, I'll just take on e5 with my queen, and just win the exchange. So he played queen to d8. And now queen takes h6, obviously, threatening mate. Rook takes e5 forced. And now what? And now what? So your initial instinct would be to play f takes e5, but the problem is, all of a sudden your queen has no squares. Bishop g5. Problems. Bishop g5 problems. So it seems like Carlsen's getting back into the game after rook takes e5. Because you can't take back. You cannot take back. But what you can do is you can play d6. And this just wins. This just wins. Because again, now we are threatening to take this. But we're also threatening to take this. Right? So for example, if you play, I don't know, bishop f6 and then bishop g5 or something, this is just mate.
Checkmate.
So that doesn't work. But quickly, just to show you how absurd this position is, after f takes e5, it's actually still a draw, believe it or not. And I'll show you the line that leads to this being a draw. So bishop g5 actually does win the queen. But queen h5, bishop e3, king h1, gh5. This is actually a draw. White, all he has is what? A rook for the queen, right? A rook for the queen. We have bishops and we have rooks. And white has 7 pawns? No, 8 pawns. White has 8 and black has 5. So white has a rook and 3 pawns for a queen. But yeah, this is actually still just a draw. And I'll show you why. Okay, so d6, obviously. Bishop d4. Bishop takes f7,
Check.
king g7. Okay, e1, queen g5. e6, bishop e5, e7. Queen g3 threatening mate. Forced. d7. Or sorry, bishop takes h5 first. Threatening rook f7, rook f8 stuff. So queen takes, and then d7. Queen e2, forking the rook and the pawn. d8 queen. Take, and this is a draw. Just queen f4 check and
Check.
queen f1 check. Draw.
Check.
Kind of absurd, right? Of course, you can't go to g1 because of queen d4 check.
Check.
And this wins because of the fork. But if you go king h1, it's just a draw.
Check. Check.
And if black tries to do this, then, you know, only white could win this if he doesn't try to perpetual, right? Because 6 on 3. But anyway, all that aside, d6 is the most principled reply. I mean, slave move that actually wins. And now rook e2, saving the rook. If he saves the bishop, say with bishop f8, what would white play here? Well, now bishop takes f7 just
Check.
wins. King takes f7, queen h7 check. King e6, f e5, king e5, rook e1 check.
Check.
And this king is going to get mated pretty quickly. So he played rook e2. D takes e7, queen takes e7. Now f5. Okay, f5 is very strong. F5 is very strong. So the threat is simply f takes g6. But the threat is also f6. And the idea of f6 is just to play queen g7 mate. So there's a couple of threats here. Probably relatively best for black here would have been to play queen f8. But after queen takes f8, king takes f8, g4, I mean, this is not really good. Just down a piece and 2 pawns. Not good. But relatively best. Okay, so he tried queen h4, just hoping for some sort of swindle. Okay, so what is what is black threatening? Does someone see what black's threatening? This is very cute. Does someone say what black is threatening? Because queen h4 does actually have a threat. So the fact that these queens are kind of opposite each other means if you can somehow move this bishop with check, it would be great. So if rook a or rook I don't know, say a5 or something, or actually say pawn takes pawn, I guess. Well, then rook takes g2 check.
Check.
Bishop f3 check.
Check.
And queens move backwards. So black suddenly snags white's queen. So yeah, the threat is to play rook takes g2, bishop f3, and to win the queen. So how should white respond? How should white respond? So white actually has a killer move here that just ends the game. And if you guys saw my game against Dlugi, you would know. For those of you who watched my YouTube video, Dlugi Chess Kid, you guys would know what the right move is. So that's how you get the advantage, by watching my videos. Because the right move is king h1. Yeah, king h1. Just like Dlugi Chess Kid. So yeah, king h1 is actually the right move. And now black, the relatively best move he can try here is actually rook takes g2 anyway. But this fails because it's not check. Again, it's still relatively best, but it's not check. And now bishop takes f7 check.
Check.
King takes f7, queen h7 check, king e8, rook a e1 check,
Check.
king d8, queen h8 check, king c7, queen e5 check, king c6, king takes g2, g takes f5, and rook takes f5. And okay. White's up the exchange and 2 pawns, and black's king is in grave danger. And white's king is actually okay. If rook g8 is king h2, and he's safe, because this is defended. Oops, this is defended. So yeah, I mean, after king h1, the problem is that you're just threatening too many things. You're threatening f6, and you're threatening f takes g6, both of which are completely crushing. Because notice this bishop can't recapture, not only because of queen takes g6, but also because of queen takes h4. So it's kind of curtains. I'll just show you guys another cute line, by the way, that bishop takes f7 is good.
Check.
As well, with the proviso that after king takes f7, f takes g6 check, king e6, G7 check, king E7. Only move that wins here. Only move that wins. Do you guys know what it is? Chess Kid would know. Chess Kid would know. Only move that wins, though. Only move that wins. So, of course, the lovely G8 equals knight.
Check.
So if you promote to a queen, the problem is I have queen d4 check.
Check.
And then after king h1, I can simply take this. But if you promote to a knight,
check.
Then after rook takes g8, I can play queen h7 check and queen takes g8. And again, I'm up the exchange, up 3 pawns. It's hopeless. And you actually have to take that interloping knight, because if you don't, you're going to get in even worse trouble. So for example, after g8 knight, after king d7, just queen h7 check. You're probably getting mated if you go back to the back row with some rook f8 shenanigan. So you have to play rook e7, but my knight defends that square. So I can just play queen f5 and then take the rook. And then again, I'm up the exchange, up 2 pawns, etc. But yeah, g8 equals knight. Only way to win. Or else queen d4 check and you can take. Okay, but anyway, that's kind of neither here nor there. Just, I love seeing forced under promotions. I know you guys do too. Forced under promotions are good. Okay, so instead of all this craziness with king h1, bishop takes f7, he just played queen f4, which is good enough. I mean, it's clearly winning. He had to play like queen f6, fg6, queen f4, rook f4, bishop g6. And now this is just the endgame that kind of happened in the game, where white's just up 2 pawns. So after g5, queen takes, rook f4. So yeah, it basically just transposed this endgame where white's up 2 pawns. So white could have won more spectacularly with either king h1 or bishop takes f7. But this is pretty simple as well. Rook takes c2, rook takes h4, bishop e2, rook e4. And now the problem is this pawn is weak, this pawn is weak. This rook is surprisingly inactive, and this bishop actually has no squares. Can't go back even because of g4. So yeah, black's just completely dead. So I'll just show you guys the finish. Rook e2, rook e7 hitting f7.
Check.
Take. And now f6 is very strong. This pawn is actually going to be the end of black. Oh, let me show you guys one more thing actually, by the way. Let me show you guys one more thing before I show the end of the game. That's kind of absurd. Okay, so in this position, after queen takes e7, if you play queen d4 check instead,
check,
which is actually relatively the best move, king h1, queen e3. Okay, do you guys know what white should play here? It's actually very funny. Okay. So do you guys know what white should play here? So the move is actually rook to f3, believe it or not. So the point is you simply want to play rook to g3 and then queen takes h5, basically. Or rook takes g6, because don't forget about this pin. Okay, so the question is, why can't you play bishop takes f3? And believe it or not, white can announce mate here. Do you know what white can announce mate in, though? What can white announce mate in? Is it mate in 6, mate in 7? What can white announce mate in? Do you guys know? what can white announce mate in? So white can actually announce mate in 17 here. Mate in 17. Very simple. I'll show you guys the mate in 17. It's not a big deal. Queen takes g6 check. And here we go. Check. 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 Check.
Check.
Check.
Check.
Check.
Check.
Rook f1. Quiet move. Quiet move. Queen g1. Now tricks. Tricks. If king takes g1, rook takes g2 is a draw. So tricks. Rook takes g1. King f2. And now tricks again. f5, threatening queen f4 mate. Or queen f4 mate in 2. So rook e5, trying to vacate squares. Checks. Checks. Checks.
Check.
Checks.
Check.
And mate.
Checkmate.
All forced. All forced. So a little mate in 17, no big deal. Anyway, thought that variation was cool. So anyway, got to this endgame. So take f6, bishop h5, and now white to move and win. Couple ways to do it. Couple ways to do it. Both rook e8 and f7 are good enough. If f7, king g7, just rook e8, and there's no way to stop the queen. Take, just queen. But the way white did is also very clever. Rook e8 first.
Check.
So it's a fork. It's a fork. And if you take, rather than take back, we're going to do another fork.
Check.
And now we can promote queen. So king g7 and queen. And so after rook e8, Magnus had enough. And he resigned. So a really tour de force from Saric. And Carlsen played a couple of moves that, were trying to complicate things, but his position just was in further and further ruin. And even though white actually missed a couple of very tactical wins, it turned out that, his 2 pawns being up were just up 2 pawns. And so black kind of had to go in some sort of endgame to avoid being mated. And just two pawns were enough. So kind of an absurd game, but